During my mother's funeral, my mother-in-law, who had attended, flashed a grin and remarked, "This house will soon pass to my son. Perhaps I should claim this room for myself." To which I cautiously responded, "Actually, I'm the one inheriting the house." She countered with a smirk, "I understand, but traditionally, doesn't a wife's possessions become her husband's? Therefore, by that logic, this house would be my son's, correct?" With a heavy sigh, I questioned, "Is that really how it works?" She added with a bright tone, "Let's make an effort to coexist harmoniously from here on out." Confused, I inquired, "What do you mean by get along?" She boldly stated, I want to make this room mine." "Does this indicate we'll be sharing the house?" She affirmed confidently, precisely. With such a magnificent home, it would be a shame to leave rooms vacant when they could accommodate both of us. Don't you agree? Despite grappling with my own sorrow, it seemed my mother-in-law was blissfully oblivious to my mourning. It puzzled me why she would raise such matters at this time. Couldn't she recognize the sorrow etched upon my face? It wasn't the moment for light-hearted discussions. This home, constructed by my esteemed father and adored by my mother, is filled with treasured memories. I couldn't bear the thought of my unreasonable mother-in-law residing here, and my husband's lack of intervention was just as disappointing. Determined to protect my beloved home from being defiled, I resolved to act proactively. I am a 44-year-old office worker who, having missed the opportunity for marriage and remained single past 42, had almost resigned myself to a life without marriage. However, an introduction through a friend led me to meet Francis, a man 6 years my junior, with whom marriage became a reality. Francis, ever considerate, often seeks my input, even for our honeymoon destination. Despite suggesting Europe, I acquiesced to his preference for the Maldives after he mentioned it. The topic of his mother moving in with us arose due to my father-in-law's declining health and her struggles with living alone. Despite understanding her situation, I reminded him of our agreement not to live with parents post-marriage. He agreed to discuss it with her, always respectful of my wishes, which sometimes leaves me feeling undeservedly guilty. Finding such a wonderful partner is a blessing, yet I regret that my father, who passed away 3 years before my wedding, never got to see me married. I had immense respect for him, a strict executive who managed to provide for us through his hard work, making our family home not just a dwelling but a place rich in memories. As an office worker myself, I've come to appreciate the challenges of professional life, deepening my admiration for my father. Following 2 years of marriage, my mother's passing added to the weight of loss in my life, prompting concern from my husband during the funeral held at our family home, a rare occurrence that underscored the depth of our family's bonds and traditions. During my mother's funeral, he was always there for me. Truly, I was fortunate to have met such a good husband. That's when my mother-in-law, Julia, arrived, offering her deepest condolences. "I sincerely sympathize with you," she said. I responded with a thank you. My interactions with Julia had been limited, as we hadn't lived together, maintaining a reasonable distance. However, it was during my mother's funeral that I glimpsed her true nature. After the ceremony, Julia approached me. Her presence wasn't strange, but her expression was oddly gleeful. "We greatly appreciate your assistance during this funeral. Thanks to you, we were able to smoothly complete the ceremony," she said, then added, "The funeral is over now, isn't it? Enough with the formalities." Initially, I thought Julia was trying to be kind, considering my grief, but it soon became clear that wasn't the case. "Your parents had such a splendid house," she remarked. I replied, "Wait a moment," as she boldly walked into the depths of the house. "Oh, Mom, this is inconvenient. Some areas are messy," I protested. Undeterred, she declared, "Don't fuss over details. More importantly, this house will be inherited by my son. I wonder if I should take this room." I hesitated. "Mom, actually, I'm the one inheriting this house," I said. She smirked, "I know. Your parents didn't have any other children, right? And isn't a wife's belongings her husband's? So, in essence, this house belongs to my son, doesn't it?" I sighed. "Is that really the case?" She cheerfully added, "From now on, let's get along." I hesitated. "What do you mean by get along?" She confidently replied, I mean turning this room into my room. After all, you and Francis will move here later, won't you? I asked, does that mean we'll be living together? She declared, exactly. With such a splendid house, it'd be a waste to have empty rooms when two people can live here. Finally, I won't have to take care of my husband all by myself. Unfortunately, my mother had recently passed away, and yet my mother-in-law was saying such things. Can't she see the sadness on my face? I was gradually getting angry with her, even though my mother's funeral had just concluded. Why would she joke around at a time like this? At that moment, my conversation with Julia caught my husband's attention. He stepped in, Mom, what are you saying? This isn't the right time for such discussions. Julia retorted, why make such a fuss? But my husband was firm, enough, just leave. He escorted her out of the house. Sorry, my mom can be unreasonable, he apologized. It's fine, thanks to you for handling it, I replied. At that moment, I felt grateful for my dependable husband. However, I would later realize that the reason my husband scolded Julia was subtly different from my own perspective. 10 days after my mother's funeral, as things settled down a bit, we decided to discuss my family home. It was then that my husband made an unexpected proposal. This apartment is cramped. Shouldn't we move back to my parents' house? I suggested. Yeah, you're right, he agreed, considering more belongings and the possibility of having kids. It's better than squeezing into this tiny apartment, he agreed. Well then, we should start preparing for the move, he said hesitantly. So, I have one thing to discuss regarding the move. What's the matter? I asked. He hesitated before saying, considering the spacious house and all the empty rooms, I thought maybe my parents could move in with us. Wait, are you suggesting we live together? I asked, so surprised. My husband is kind, but recently I've noticed something. While I thought he always prioritized my opinions, I wonder if he's actually just a yes man. Could he be an outright pushover? His suggestion about living with my mother-in-law and the way he complies with her requests for my persuasion makes me wonder. Moreover, despite knowing I'm against cohabitation, he repeatedly proposes it to me, prioritizing her over me. Haven't I said it repeatedly? We won't live together, I remind him. He responds, but Mom keeps insisting on it. I counter, during the funeral, you scolded her, didn't you? You stood up for me and opposed cohabitation. Well, yes, I was upset about her barging into the house, but that doesn't mean I'm entirely against living together. I just thought such an important decision shouldn't be made casually in that setting, he said. It was decisive. My husband merely nods and relays my words, but he seems more inclined toward my mother-in-law. Moreover, despite advocating for proper discussions, he maintains a certain distance and avoids making definitive decisions. Perhaps he's unconsciously doing this, believing he remains neutral. People of this type can be quite tricky. They convince themselves they're neutral and capable of making the right judgments. It's frustrating. Anyway, I oppose living with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and suggested living in this room. I've said it before, and I won't change my stance. Please convey this to your mom. My husband responds, why? You seem really bothered by it. Fine, I'll let her know. While I prefer to avoid living with my in-laws, I've prepared myself for the possibility, depending on the circumstances, when we got married. However, witnessing my mother-in-law's behavior during my mother's funeral, can I imagine living together in the cherished home my respected father built and where my mother lived? Now that I've become aware of my husband's lack of assertiveness, cohabitation is unthinkable. When my husband conveyed my opposition to cohabitation, my mother-in-law directly protested by calling me. Why are you opposing cohabitation when there's such a spacious house? You're Francis's wife now, and his father and I are your parents, right? Why such strong opposition to living together with us? I've already declined cohabitation before. I apologize. My husband has mobility issues, and it's challenging for me alone. Are you saying you'll abandon us? Did you hear the reasons from my husband? I apologize. But this heartless person, I won't ask anything of you anymore. I feel sorry for my father-in-law's health condition. However, based on my mother-in-law's past behavior, I can envision a scenario where responsibilities related to my father-in-law would inevitably fall upon me if we were to live together. For such a living arrangement to be considered, a significant improvement in the attitudes of both my husband and mother-in-law is absolutely necessary. A few days after my mother-in-law labeled me heartless, my husband began to rearrange the furniture in our living room, moving the sofa and tables to make room. "What are you doing? Is this preparation for moving boxes?" I inquired. "No, I'm creating space for 2 beds here," he replied. The mere mention of 2 beds immediately filled me with apprehension. "Are your parents coming to stay?" I cautiously asked. He confirmed, "No, they're moving in, starting today." This was a shock to me. Despite my clear opposition to living together, it seemed my husband and mother-in-law had decided to proceed without considering my feelings. She told me she wouldn't rely on me anymore, but it seems she's turned to my husband instead. "Why is this happening?" I questioned. He explained, "Their lease is up, so we decided they'd move here instead of renewing. It'll be cramped with 4 of us, but we're moving soon, right? Just bear with it for a little while." But my concern was not just about the space. Why is cohabitation even being considered? I've expressed repeatedly that I do not want to live with someone who showed such disrespect at my parents' house during the funeral. "I'll talk to Mom. We're going to be living together, so please try to get along," he said, missing the point of my concerns. "Why do you always prioritize what your mom says?" I asked. "It's not about prioritizing her. I listen to both of you and then make a judgment," he clarified. Yet, it seemed he was more influenced by my mother-in-law than he realized, unwittingly falling into her plans for cohabitation. Initially, I thought of my husband as kind and considerate, but his inability to stand firm against my mother-in-law's schemes has put me in a difficult position. Now, faced with the reality of living with my in-laws, I must adapt to this new dynamic. As expected, the apartment is too cramped for 4 adults. Despite the inconvenience, my mother-in-law has the audacity to complain about the space. "I apologize for suddenly increasing the household by 2, my husband said, trying to ease the tension. "No, if you or Lester face any inconvenience due to mobility issues, let us know," I offered, trying to be accommodating. Lester, my father-in-law, despite having mobility issues, seems more self-sufficient than expected. He's polite and attempts to manage on his own, a stark contrast to my mother-in-law's behavior. "Is there a nearby drugstore?" "I forgot my medicated patch and would like to buy one," Lester mentioned. "Hold on, dear. Considering your mobility issues, it's best if you stay here. If you need anything from outside, let us know and we can get it for you. It would be inconvenient for Francis and the others if you were to fall outside," I suggested, trying to ensure his safety while navigating this new living arrangement. "I guess you're right. Sorry, but I need it urgently. Could you go buy it for me?" he asked with a sigh. "Understood," I replied, though running an errand for a medicated patch wasn't a big deal. It bothered me that my mother-in-law made decisions without involving me in the conversation. Additionally, my father-in-law, while polite on the surface, seemed to follow my mother-in-law's lead. Like my husband, he had become another yes man to her. This time, it was just a minor errand, but as we continued living together, I feared everything would eventually be pushed onto me. Could I allow these people to live in the cherished home my parents left behind? It was no joke. If they moved in, they would tarnish the house. I was determined to find a way to protect my parents' home. As my mother-in-law and father-in-law prepared for their move to my parents' home, I decided to take preemptive action before their relocation. My mother-in-law was in high spirits, excited about moving to a spacious house. "Hey, can you lend us the key to your parents' house? We'd like to check out our rooms. I have some errands to run, so I'll give the key to Francis. Francis, can you drop us off before heading home? We want to stop by the storage room where we dumped our belongings. We need to measure the furniture sizes." "Got it. I'll take the key," I replied, keeping the peace with my mother-in-law's good mood. About 10 days passed uneventfully. However, behind the scenes, my preparations were progressing steadily. All right, the moving preparations are complete. Soon, life in that house will begin, I thought to myself as my husband and my in-laws finished their moving preparations. It was time for me to reveal a shocking truth to the three of them. "Everyone, I have something to discuss," I began. My husband replied, "What is it?" "Get to the point." My mother-in-law wondered, "Is it about plans for celebrating our move?" I clarified, "No, we won't be moving to that house." She exclaimed, "What? What do you mean?" I handed over a document. "This is an application for renouncing my inheritance," I stated. My husband protested, "Renouncing your inheritance? Come on, that's a joke, right?" I insisted, "It's not a joke. Look, there's an official court approval here. For me, that house holds immense sentimental value. I couldn't bear the thought of you living there, so I decided to let go of the house, preserving it as a beautiful memory in my heart." My mother-in-law scolded, "What madness possessed you? Even if you were letting it go, you could have sold it for money. Why abandon the house?" I explained, "Even if I sold it, you'd just rely on that money next. I thought it'd be clearer if I simply had nothing." She retorted, "We moved out of our previous place for this move, you know. What are you doing? How will you make it up to us?" I stood my ground. "I've consistently opposed cohabitation, yet without proper discussion, you forced it upon me." So, I took a firm stance. Upon learning that I had renounced my inheritance, both my husband and mother-in-law seemed stunned, their faces drained of color, speechless, their strength sapped. My father-in-law looked bewildered as he observed the two of them. However, I felt a sense of relief, having taken steps to preserve the integrity of my family's legacy. I wasn't about to let up. "Francis," I continued, "I've been thinking about getting a divorce. What do you think?" "Huh? Divorce?" my husband stammered. "Francis, you should divorce this ridiculous wife immediately," my mother-in-law chimed in. I had anticipated her immediate demand for divorce. What I wanted to confirm was whether my husband could make an independent decision at this critical moment. If he deferred to my mother-in-law now, it would make our future together even more challenging. "Even if you're suddenly asked about divorce, it's troubling, Mom," my husband mumbled. His response was still pending, but my resolve to proceed with the divorce had solidified. "Fine, divorce is the only option," my mother-in-law snapped. My father-in-law interjected, "Francis, it can't be helped. Your mom insists." My husband sighed, "Well, you seem to want a divorce too, and maybe that's for the best." Even in significant decisions, my husband and father-in-law remained yes men to my mother-in-law. And now, my husband's words made it sound as if he had changed his opinion for my sake. "Very well," I declared, "let's proceed with the divorce. I'll be moving out with minimal belongings." I spent the night at a budget hotel. The next day, I had urgent matters to attend to, so I took half a day off work and headed back to the courthouse. A few days later, my mother-in-law called me. What's going on? It seems that house is becoming yours. Why the sudden outburst?" Did you find out through the estate division process?" "Yes, that house belongs to me. You forged documents and deceived us." "Why would I forge documents meant for court submission? Those are genuine." "Then why is the house becoming yours when you were supposed to renounce the inheritance?" "Well, right after that, I promptly withdrew the application. You know, renouncing an inheritance is difficult once the application is accepted. However, it takes about a month for the renunciation application to be accepted, during which time it can be withdrawn at any point. The documents I showed my in-laws were not acceptance-related. They were from the application stage. I intentionally made them believe I had relinquished the house and confronted them with the prospect of divorce to gauge their reactions and decide my next steps. I didn't expect my mother-in-law's mindset to change, but I hoped my husband would reconsider and express that he didn't want a divorce. If he said he didn't want a divorce, I planned to rethink it and later explain about the house. However, so the house really becomes yours then. Since it was acquired before the divorce, it's subject to property division, right? In such cases, you two are supposed to split the money from selling it, don't you? My mother-in-law seemed intent on taking whatever she could from me, knowing the house wouldn't be hers. But I had anticipated this. If that house were jointly acquired by us, it would indeed be considered shared property. However, that house is a unique asset acquired through inheritance, so it won't be subject to property division. Unfortunately, specific assets like this aren't eligible for division. Upon hearing that the house would be mine, didn't you seek legal advice? Had Francis contributed towards the mortgage or renovation expenses, those might have been factored into the division. However, I presume that was not the case, correct? Regarding the assets Francis would receive from the division of property, given our short marriage, there's not much of significance, possibly just the car, though it still has a loan outstanding. You're planning to selfishly keep the inheritance, aren't you? Heartless. I am guarding that house because it is filled with dear memories of my parents. I cannot allow individuals like you to reside there. Should you have any further grievances, I advise consulting with a lawyer. Following the conversation with my mother-in-law, the divorce process unfolded without complications. It's likely she pressed my husband for a swift divorce. Ultimately, the divorce was concluded, freeing me from the disputes with my in-laws. It felt like a victory, preserving my father's house from potential desecration. After my departure, my former in-laws temporarily stayed in the apartment where my ex-husband and I once lived. Given its limited space, the absence of one person would hardly alleviate the crowding. My ex-mother-in-law began searching for new accommodations, but their advanced age posed obstacles in passing rental screenings. Consequently, my ex-husband opted to rent a smaller, single-family home for them. Despite its reduced size, the rent is presumably higher than the apartments, adding to my ex-husband's financial burdens. My ex-mother-in-law's initial excitement about relocating to the spacious house left by my father has been replaced with the reality of adjusting to a much smaller living space, likely a source of considerable disappointment for her. Meanwhile, I've embarked on a new chapter in my parents' house, which radiates warmth and feels as though my parents are still with me. How did you find this narrative? If it captured your interest, consider following the channel for more stories. See you next time.